Salmon Run is a game that feels like you're always learning something new. The mode has so much depth to it. Today I want to explain boss mechanics in the mode. What do I mean by boss mechanics? Well, in Salmon Run, there's a lot of variability or RNG, but there are also some fundamental rules to the game that never change. An example of this is the way that boss spawns behave. These things never change, and learning how they work means you can learn how to fully maximize your potential within those restrictions. Today I want to talk about how bosses act, the patterns in which they behave, and the way you can manipulate them so you can learn more about the mode and eventually improve as a player. This video will be split into two halves. The first part will detail boss aggro, and the second will detail boss cycles and the management of them. Before we start, I just want to mention that this video is more free flow in nature and features a lot of opinion-based arguments as to why I think learning these skills are important. It's also a 5,000 word essay, but it's mostly been taken from years of me playing the game, but I also recognise the communities I've been in and the other players I've learned from. I've left a lot of links and supporting documents in the description. I'd also recommend watching some of my earlier videos if you're very new to the game. However, I do think that what I'll discuss today is beneficial to everyone, regardless of your level or experience in Salmon Run. Boss aggro. To start, I want to discuss what is commonly referred to as boss aggro. Aggro in this context means to have the attention of. All bosses and all enemies in the game behave in repeatable set patterns. It is extremely unlikely that enemies deviate from these patterns, and in most cases that it happens, it's either a bug or just latency. So in 99% of your games, you will always expect the enemies to behave in set patterns. Before I get there, something of note to mention briefly. Depending on the hazard that you're playing at, bosses spawn at set times. Whilst this won't necessarily be discussed in this video, a good player is somebody that understands that knowing the rules behind boss spawns allows you to make more informed predictions about what is likely to happen next. There is a chart on screen right now which shows the times of new boss spawns for different hazards. Thank you to Mina for this chart. There is a link to the Overfishing Fundamentals guide in the description that talks more about this, and I genuinely recommend reading this for more in-depth analysis. But for the sake of this video, it is important to remember that bosses spawn at set times. Each boss and enemy has a different set pattern. These don't change, and whilst there is some variability to it, such as the amount of players currently alive, for the most part you can expect the enemies to act in certain ways. What's important here is that you can then manipulate, or at the very least have an expectation that you know what is coming next with a particular boss. For your regular bosses in regular day waves, they all have set behaviour, so let's quickly run through how they behave, including how to manipulate their behaviour. Steelheads. They target the closest player to them. If no player is within range of taking the aggro, Steelheads will come closer, which is called luring. Once a player is within range, the Steelhead will start attacking, facing the direction of the player who has the aggro. It doesn't stay aggroed to one player. Whoever is closest will be the next target. They can only be attacked during their attack cycle, with certain exceptions. I will speak more about this in the second half of the video. Steelheads have a funny interaction with players that are higher than them. You'll notice this when you're using the Inkjet or the Booyah Bomb special, or if you're on a map that has higher platforms, such as the Spiral in Sockeye Station for example. The Steelhead will focus on you, but it will come closer and it won't attack you until it reaches the same level as you. The easiest way to test this, or play around with this, is to climb on top of a fish stick, or to get on top of a Slammin Lid, and watch as the Steelhead will come closer to you. It can sometimes be interrupted if another player interferes with the boss and disrupts this lure. When on a fish stick, the Steelhead will move in a straight line instead of following the natural path of the map, which can sometimes cause them to actually fall off the map. However, when done correctly, you're able to bring a Steelhead much closer to you without the threat of its attack. Steeleels. They target the closest player to them when they spawn, unless that player is currently targeted by another Steeleel. You can only be targeted by multiple Steeleels if there are more Steeleels alive than players. The Steeleel will be looking at you and driving towards you. The target doesn't change unless the player is splatted. You cannot penetrate their body and can only attack the exposed driver at the back of it, with certain exceptions. I will speak more about this in the second half of the video. Steeleels can be de-aggroed from you in a few ways. The easiest way is by using a lift or an elevator, currently only available in Marina's Bay or Salmon Lids Smokeyard. For your other maps, you can de-aggro them by reaching the top of a fish stick or by being on top of a slamming lid. You can also end the inkjet special or use a booyah bomb to force them to target other players. These won't work if you're the last player alive. Maws. They initially target the player closest to them when they spawn, unless that player already has a Maws on them. After a Maws has attacked, it will then target the player currently closest to it. Again, if this player already has a Maws following them, it will then target the next nearest player. You can only be targeted by one Maws at a time unless there are more Maws alive than players. It is possible to be targeted by two different Maws spawning at the exact same time if you're the closest player and don't already have a Maws targeting you. It's not very common though. You can tell you're being targeted as you'll be followed by a trail of green ink with a small red dot. They can only be attacked during their attack cycle, with certain exceptions, which I will speak more about in the second half of this video. Maws can be de-aggroed in a couple of different ways. The obvious way is if the targeted player is splattered. The other obvious way is if somebody else is closer to it after it attacks. This is known as taking the aggro. The other less obvious way is by standing on an uninkable surface for a prolonged length of time, such as grates, rails, or slamming lids. This won't happen immediately like with Steeleels. You'll need to remain in one position for a length of time before the Maws will then target someone else. And again, ending an inkjet and using the booyah bomb will also de-aggro Maws. These will not work if you're the last player alive. Drizzlers. They have set landing spots on each map that they will jump to. When no players are within its radius, it will then jump to another landing spot, usually closer to where players are. It will continue to jump until a player is within its radius. When a player enters its radius, the Drizzler will stop and become aggroed to them. It will face this player when it attacks. The Drizzler has 2 attack cycles before it jumps again. Once a Drizzler is aggroed onto you, it will remain that way until it jumps again. You can only attack Drizzlers when they attack, with certain exceptions. I will speak more about this in the second half of the video. There are links in the description for visual guides of the Drizzler landing spots for each map. Scrappers. When they initially spawn in, Scrappers will target the closest player to them. This can change. You'll notice Scrappers moving to and from targets if left uninterrupted. When hit by a player, they will then follow that player regardless of other closer players. This changes if another player then shoots at it. You'll hear this referred to as tagging the Scrapper or taking the aggro. If the Scrapper is then stunned, after a short while it will resume following the player that originally shot at it. Multiple Scrappers can be aggroed to one player. You can only attack the back of the Scrapper where the exposed driver is, with certain exceptions, which I will speak more about in the second half of the video. You can de-aggro Scrappers in a few ways. The obvious way is if the targeted player is splattered. Another way is by being on top of fish sticks and slamming lids. And lastly, ending an inkjet or using a booyah bomb will also cause them to target someone else. These will not work if you're the last player alive. Slamming Lids. Slamming lids will follow the closest player when they spawn in. This can change and the lid can start moving a different direction if another player becomes closer. Within a certain radius, they'll stop moving, activate their shield, and start spawning lesser salmonids. Once the lessers have been slayed, the lid will not spawn any further lessers unless a player walks underneath it or it has moved towards a new target again. Walking underneath a lid causes it to slam down and crush everything underneath it. After a set time, the lid will start moving again if no player is within a certain radius of it. If there is, the lid will remain in the same place. Their shield cannot be penetrated, and damaging the exposed driver on top of the lid is the only way to defeat it. Again, there are exceptions to this rule which I will discuss in the second half of the video. Lids can only move positions when the closest player is splattered or by having players move away from it, much the same as Drizzlers. Flipper Floppers. Flipper Floppers will target the player closest to it after it dives. When they first spawn in, they may take some time to reach the closest player, depending on the map and depending on the tide. Their landing spot is a large circle that needs to be painted over prior to them attacking. If caught in an unpainted circle, the player is immediately splattered. The flipper flopper will then leap back out and target a different player, whoever is closest. When the circle is successfully painted, the flipper flopper will take substantial damage to its health and remain on the ground, exposed for a few seconds. If not defeated, it will then resubmerge in ink and restart its cycle. However, it doesn't regain the health it has then lost. Their attack cycle causes them to be unreachable for a certain amount of time. There are exceptions to this, which I will discuss in the second half of the video. Flipper floppers can be de-aggroed off of a player in a couple of ways. The first is if the player is splattered. The second is by the use of specials such as Booyah Bomb and Inkjet. Thirdly, players can stand on uninkable surfaces, most notably grates, and this will force the flipper flopper to target someone else. This also includes Slammin Lids and the top of a fish stick. These may not work if you are the last player alive, and you may see the boss staying submerged in ink until you then move onto inkable ground. Stingers. These appear in set locations on maps. Stingers target the player furthest away from it when it starts shaking its head looking for a target. Once their attack cycle is finished, it will then start shaking its head again and prepare to target the current furthest player away from it. This cycle will repeat continuously unless defeated. The stinger itself does not damage you. Their stingray attack lasts a few seconds and matches the speed that you are going at. There are links in the description for visual guides of stinger spawning spots for each map. Stingers will always target the furthest player away from it. There is no way to avoid this unless you are closer to it than a teammate. If you are the last player alive, you will be targeted regardless of where you are on the map. Flyfish. Flyfish appear in set locations on maps. When they spawn in, the small fry in the middle of the flyfish will aggro to whoever is closest. You can see this when it's moving towards you. When the flyfish has decided on an angle to launch from, it will then stay in one position and start firing missiles. When no flyfish basket or launcher has been destroyed, the red launcher will target the closest player, and the blue launcher will target any random player except for the player currently being targeted by the red launcher. If one basket or launcher has been destroyed, you will hear this being referred to as being weakened, then the remaining basket will target the closest player, regardless of what actual colour that basket is. Once the missiles have been launched, the flyfish will then close its baskets and move around a certain area before stopping and attacking again. You can be hurt by the flyfish itself and its exhaust. Flyfish can only be attacked when they are attacking the players, except in certain situations, which I will talk about in the second half of this video. There are links in the description for visual guides of flyfish spawning spots for each map. You can aggro them when they are moving around in their neutral state before they stop moving and prepare their attack. Their missiles can be avoided if you are underneath a structure, most notably grates. Fish sticks. Fish sticks do not target or aggro any individual player. They have set spots on each map in which they appear. Once in place, the small fry will drop ink until defeated. Once defeated, the stick remains in place until the end of the wave. After 3 fish sticks land on the map, no more will spawn for the rest of the wave. They can be defeated before they land, and this causes the stick to despawn. There are links in the description for visual guides of fish stick landing spots for each map. Big shots. Big shots do not target or aggro any individual player. They also don't damage you directly. Their cannon launches shots which always land close to the basket, acting essentially the same way as a wave breaker. Each shot has 2 waves, both of which can damage the player. The big shot itself will walk to and from the cannon and keep launching shots until it is defeated. It is possible to avoid the waves if on elevated ground. The cannons have set locations on each map and will never appear on high tides. There are links in the description for visual guides of big shot cannon spots for each map. Lessers. A quick note about lesser salmonids. Lessers will always target the player closest to them. You can aggro them and de-aggro them by moving closer to them or by going further away. This applies to other waves too, such as Mothership, Tornado, Mud Mouse, Cohawk Charge, Goldie Seeking, Fog, and Grillers. The only notable exception is rush/glowflies, in which they target only one person. I have an extensive 2-part guide on how that wave works, and so I will not speak about it here today. In the future, I plan to cover grillers extensively too, so there will be a link here once that is done. Boss cycles and management. I have made an entire video about boss management. I speak in depth about how different bosses affect you and your team in different ways. I'd sincerely recommend it as a follow-up to this video if you haven't already seen it. However, what I didn't talk about in that video was boss cycles. Boss cycles are the cycle in which they behave, from spawning in, being lured if possible, finding a target or having aggro, attacking, and then going back to a neutral state where it either finds another target or it prepares to attack again. Not all bosses have cycles, but a lot of them do, and what is key to remember here is how some bosses can only be attacked and slayed when they're attacking you, which makes the window of opportunity small. Steelheads are usually the best example of a boss cycle. They have an armoured outer body, which means that without certain specials or Grizzco weapons, you cannot attack them unless they are attacking you. This means you are dependent on their cycle and their patterns before you even have a choice. Steelheads have a bomb that can cause a large explosion that can instantly splat you up close, but also paints the entire area in enemy ink. They become oppressive in confined spaces and usually become a top priority to eliminate as soon as you can. When searching for a player, they'll walk rather slowly towards them. When they're within their radius, they'll stop. When you're targeted, you'll notice the steelhead face you and then prepare its attack, which is rather disgustingly when you think about it, hacking up a big green bomb made of its own saliva. During this time, you can attack it by damaging the bomb as it's being prepared to throw at you. It's 300 HP and almost every weapon in the game is able to slay it in one cycle, that is, before it's thrown. If not, the bomb explodes where it landed and, as mentioned, can instantly splat you if you're close enough. However, it's possible to survive this if you're far enough away from the blast or if you parry the attack with a squid roll. After the bomb explodes, the steelhead will go back to its neutral state before following the same patterns, walking closer to a target, finding a target, preparing to attack, and then attacking. The steelhead is just an example of boss cycles, but a lot of bosses in Salmon Run work the same way. Drizzlers are another armoured boss that force you to wait until it shoots its torpedo, giving you a small window of attack. You can also attack it whilst it's in the air as its weak spot is exposed. Flyfish force you to wait until the basket's open before you can throw a bomb in there. Maws have part of their cycle where they are submerged, meaning you have to wait until they attack you before you can attack. Other bosses such as Scrappers, Slammin Lids, Steeleels, Flipper Floppers and Big Shots can all technically always be damaged, but have cycles or patterns of movement that make it difficult for some weapons to consistently damage them, meaning you have to wait until a better point in their cycle before you can attack. All of this adds up to time, and in Salmon Run, the clock is always against you. In a sense, the timer is your main enemy. You only have a set time to complete the tasks in front of you, which is to gain quota and to survive. Having bosses work on cycles mean you have to spend time getting them to attack. Time spent here is time you can't get back, and if you miss a cycle, then you need to spend more time. All of this adds up, and before you know it, it's 30 seconds left and you've just seen that quota is nowhere near met. I want to impress this point upon you then. Time is what you're working against, and being efficient with how you spend your time is one of the best ways to get the most out of Salmon Run. For this reason, you'll notice in the footage I've used in this video that I will always prioritise bosses that work on cycles versus those that don't. When I see a flyfish and a stinger, I will always prioritise the flyfish if the baskets are currently open, as the stinger can be attacked whenever, as it's always vulnerable. This is the same for steelheads and drizzlers, and I actually give these two bosses a bit more priority due to their potential to take away turf and space, which then forces you to either take damage, stop healing, stop recovering ink, and potentially lose quite a lot of time. Drizzlers, especially because of their 900 HP, make them a bit of a tricky enemy to manage. If you've got a weapon that is objectively weak, you're going to spend quite a while trying to damage the Drizzler. Learning how to aggro it and then shooting its torpedo back as soon as possible means you efficiently deal with this enemy and can then move on to the next task. Obviously, this becomes a bit more tricky to manage if things are chaotic and the hazard level is high and your attention is being forced elsewhere, but this is why I try to always shoot back torpedoes and even prioritise it at the expense of other enemies. It simply can take too much time to manage Drizzlers, so why would you ignore the exploit to get around that? And so this is how I play Salmon Run for the most part. Different bosses have different priorities to me, but I generally always try to prioritise bosses who will otherwise waste my time. And again, this always factors in the weapons I have, the ink I have, the teammates I have, the specials I have, the time I have left, and so on, so on. And I appreciate that it is easier said than done, and for somebody like me who has 7 years and counting in the game, decisions like this are snap and quick because I've almost taught my brain how to do it. So for you, if you're new, less experienced, or just overwhelmed, then don't expect results immediately. This video is just a guide to show you how to eventually get your brain to work in a way that fully maximizes potential and, of course, efficiency. One of the ways to fully maximise potential in Salmon Run is to exploit the different ways in which you can take advantage of working outside of these strict cycles. I've used the Steelhead as the primary example here, but this applies to bosses that have their own cycles and are either protected by armour or are protected by being submerged. Drizzlers, Flyfish and Maws are the main ones, but also enemies like Slammin Lids, Flipper Floppers, Scrappers, Steeleels, they can all be viewed this way too. These other bosses can be damaged regardless of where they are in their cycle, however you can defeat them quicker or more efficiently if you can remove the need to wait for their cycles to complete. Specials are the main way to do this. A lot of them can ignore armour and slay bosses irrespective of where they are in their attack cycle. Booyah Bomb, Triple Ink Strike, Killer Whale, Reef Slider and Kraken can all pierce through armour and damage bosses. It's important to remember this when debating whether to use specials or thinking about how you can quickly do a task. One Booyah Bomb, for example, can easily defeat clusters of armoured bosses all grouped together in a matter of seconds. And isn't this quicker than waiting for them to all start their attack cycle? It's usually safer too. This is probably most notable when you have multiple Steeleels circling the basket. You can't penetrate their body, and neither can the majority of weapons, but the Booyah Bomb can, as can the Reef Slider, the Triple Ink Strike and a Killer Whale. Crab Tank, and just for completeness the Ink Cannon in Co-op Charge Night Waves, have explosive projectiles that are able to damage enemies without directly hitting them, rather with just them being in the radius of the explosion. Again, Steelheads are the best example here. You'll need to wait for them to attack, but once they are attacking, you can hit them anywhere on their bodies and it will register as a one-hit KO. Inkjet, Wavebreaker and Triple Splashdown don't have armour breaking properties as far as I'm aware, so are best used elsewhere in different ways. Wavebreaker can damage enemies regardless of their armour. You'll notice this most against Drizzlers and Scrappers, but the total is small enough that you shouldn't use it for this reason alone. The other main way to exploit boss cycles and improve efficiency is by the use of some Grizzco weapons, which are obviously limited. The main reason they are limited is because they are simply game breaking. The Grizzco Slosher and the Grizzco Stamper are the two weapons that can hit and damage every enemy in the game, regardless of armour, barriers, etc. They can pierce through multiple enemies and they can simply ignore every boss cycle. Steelheads, Drizzlers and Flyfish are the best examples of these. Both weapons do not need to wait until their weak points are exposed. The same for Scrappers, Steeleels and even Slammin Lids. Both weapons are so much faster to get rid of them compared to all other weapons. These weapons are why you see the game being pushed to its absolute limits when they are featured. Gorillas, for example, is probably the easiest way to represent how broken these two weapons are for negating the need to work in cycles. The Grizzco Slosher can pierce through gorillas and stun them in one shot because it's able to hit 2 hitboxes with one slosh. You don't need to wait until its tail is exposed or have it be hit at a certain angle, you just hit it and it will pierce through its entire body. Immediately, you're able to then dictate the flow of the entire wave, instead of the gorillas forcing you to act around them. And the Grizzco Stamper is the same, except it's arguably even more powerful, as you're able to simply one-shot the gorilla without needing to stun it or wait for it to expose its tail. It's quite frankly stupid how powerful the Grizzco Stamper is in this regard, and it's why the weapon is viewed as broken. Thank you if you've made it this far. I hope this video helps in some way, even if it's just to reaffirm some of the views you have. If it's helped you, please let me know. I am keen to take on more ideas and videos outside of just weapon and map guides, so if there are any other aspects of the game you'd like me to cover, please let me know. I'll catch you guys soon.